All right, so we've been introduced to the monopolist. We have an understanding of why such a market structure would exist. What are the key characteristics, the things that would block entry? And so now we want to start getting into how we would graph a monopolist and how it makes its decisions to maximize profits. How do we show how much profit they're making? All those wonderful things. So we're going to start here with a comparison of perfect competition and monopoly. And we're looking at it from the firm's point of view. And so what we learned in an earlier chapter about the perfect competitor was that its firm demand came from the market demand, which is downward sloping, and the market supply curve would interact and determine the market price, and then that would give us our firm demand, which is the same thing as our marginal revenue. Situation looks a little different for a monopolist. We can look at it, what happens if a perfectly competitive firm raises its price versus what happens if a monopolist raises its price. So looking back at the perfect competitor, if you were to raise your price and to charge anything other than, let's say this was $10, and this particular firm decides it wants to charge $12 because it feels so special about itself, what would happen? Well, from the market's point of view, from the consumers in the market, they can buy as much as they want at $10. That was the market demand and supply. Why would you want to go and pay $12 for something that you perceive as being identical? Remember, that was a key characteristic of perfect competitors, is their product seems identical. So the point is that a perfect competitive firm would sell zero if they raise their price like that. So they're not going to, of course, is what we conclude. But what is the situation like for a monopolist? If they were selling some quantity, we'll call it 50, at this $10 price, do they lose the whole market when they raise the price to 12? And the answer is no, they don't. Okay. What we have to think about is, what does it mean? What is the difference from the firm's point of view of perfect competitive and monopolist? When we talked about perfect competition, we talked about this horizontal demand curve. That's all a perception from the point of view of the firm. The true market demand, of course, is downward sloping. It's just that they were so small they couldn't shift the whole demand curve, the whole supply curve, I guess is really what they'd be shifting. They couldn't shift the whole supply curve by producing more because they were just a tiny little percentage, and therefore the price didn't appear to change no matter what they did. But a monopolist is the market. The demand curve for the market is the demand curve for the firm. So on the left-hand side for perfect competition, I have to draw two pictures. I have to draw the market demand and supply, which determines this price for the firm. But on the monopolist, it's all one picture. So if a monopolist raises its price, they don't lose all of their sales. They're just going to lose some of them. So let's bring this down and call that 40. Okay, so if they were to raise their price from 10 to 12, they do lose some because their law of demand, of course, holds. People will have to make their decisions. They're going to shift their money around. They're not going to necessarily completely drop out of the market, but they might buy a fewer because law of demand, price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Some will economize, some will try to use fewer units of the products, some may actually do without, but in the market sense, you don't lose everything, you just lose some. Now, this is going to be very important for the next little bit we want to look at. If we look back over the firm, we have demand equals price equals marginal revenue. What's going to happen over here? What's going to happen over here is going to be just a little bit more complicated. We see that the price, when the price was $10, they sold, they sold 50. So total revenue is 500. When the price is 12, they sold 40. So total revenue, put that there. Total revenue is 480. What is marginal revenue? Over here, we didn't have to think about it too hard because every time we sold a unit, we got exactly the price in that additional amount. So we got additional $10, additional $10, additional $10. And that's all it was trying to calculate is what is additional revenue. Here, if we're going to move from charging $12 to charging $10, if we're trying to increase the quantity sold, the only way we can do that is by dropping the price. People are only willing to buy 40 units at $12. If I want to sell more than 40, I have to, because of my downward sloping demand, drop my price. And so I do take my total revenue from 480 to 500, total revenue 480 to 500. I do increase my revenue, my additional revenue by 20. My marginal revenue would be 20, right? But 20 for those 10 units. So that's an additional 10 units to get $20, an additional $2 per unit I'm able to get. But what that all means is my marginal revenue does not equal price. And in fact, what's going to happen is it's always going to be less than the price. So let's look at that next. All right, so we're going to pretend here that we have a monopolist, a very tiny world, and I'm going to go with something like movies. Like there's only one company that sells movies. And at the moment, what we can see is that if they will price it at $20, they will sell 9 tickets. And if they price it at $19, they will sell 10. So the demand curve is not under the control of the monopolist. That is one of the misconceptions about monopolists, is they can charge any price they want. And what we're going to learn in this chapter is that's not true. They have to be sensitive to the demand curve. They can't force you to buy something you don't want. They can't make you pay a price you don't want. The demand curve is telling you what prices people are willing to pay for particular quantities. And we also find that charging the maximum price, we aren't going to show this right now, but we will show that charging the highest price possible is not how they maximize profits. The monopolist does have to respond to the demand curve. They're balancing their costs and the revenue is dependent on the demand. So just putting that out there. But right now, let's just look at the impact on marginal revenue. That's what we want to focus on. So if they want to sell one more ticket, they want to move from 9 to 10, according to this demand curve, they have to drop the price from $20 to $19. Okay. Now, in our world, we are dealing with a situation where there is a market price. They're not going to charge different prices to different consumers. That's called price discrimination, which sounds like a bad thing, but I promise you it's not. It's just discriminating between your different groups of consumers. Some price discrimination is legal, some is illegal. Unfortunately, we're not really going into that in this class. But we're going to assume that this is a world where they can only charge one price. There's no way for them to determine which consumers are willing to pay more or less. So if they want to sell one more ticket, they have to drop the price for everybody. Now, if they do so, what is the significance of this little rectangle I've drawn here? What it shows you is that for each of the 9 tickets they used to be able to sell at $20, they're now going to sell them for $19. So they have lost $1 on every one of those 9 ticket sales. Why would they be willing to do that? Well, because they're trying to gain this one. They're trying to gain this sale. And in order to do so, they gave up the $1 per ticket price on each one of those 9. So they're going to gain all of this. What is that? That means that they're able to sell one more ticket at $19. So they're going to gain $19 and give up $9. Okay, so what's the significance of that? So let me write that down first. They lose $9. $1 per ticket sale of the original 9, and they gain $19 by having that additional sale, that 10th sale. So the net here will be $10. So net, in this case, gain of $10. What is marginal revenue? Marginal revenue is the additional revenue you earn by selling one more unit. In this particular example that I have drawn, your marginal revenue is the $10. In order to sell one more ticket, I had to drop the price and I could gain $10. So what this really means is marginal revenue is $10, but price is $19. All right, let me ask you one little technical question. Does 10 equal 19? That was a hard one, wasn't it? Of course 10 does not equal 19. And so what I'm trying to point out here is price does not equal marginal revenue in a monopolist situation. Price does not equal marginal revenue in a downward sloping demand case. And that is the significance of all of this I'm trying to show you. That when a firm faces a downward sloping demand, the only way for them to sell more is to drop the price, which means they lose revenue on some of those earlier units they would have sold at a higher price, and they gain revenue for selling that additional one. And whatever that nets out is your marginal revenue. So marginal revenue will lie below the demand curve. It's no longer equal to it like in perfect competition. Okay, so now we're ready to show profit maximization for monopolists. It's going to seem quite similar to what we've learned before, especially if you break it down by steps. Profit maximization is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. If you produce a quantity less than that, we can see that marginal revenue, so here's where they're equal. So for all these quantities where it's less than the spot where MR equals MC, marginal revenue is higher than marginal cost. So you're growing total revenue faster than you're growing costs, which basically means you're growing profit. So as I expand my output, my profits grow, 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 grow. And as soon as I go to a quantity beyond that, my costs, additional costs, are faster than my additional revenue. I'm beginning to shrink profit. So profit will be maximized at that spot, MR equals MC. All right, step 2 will be find the price for the Q star. So find P star for the Q star you just found. So here's Q star. Where do we find price? Aha, we have to look to a demand curve. A demand curve just happens to be the curve that tells you what price people are willing to pay for every quantity. In perfect competition, we didn't really have to think about that too much because marginal revenue was equal to price. But here, this is where you're going to get lost. Once you find where MR equals MC, you've got to also find the price. All right, step 3, like we've seen before in perfect competition, is am I making a profit or a loss? So the first thing is, am I making a profit or loss? I have to look to my average total cost. So find the average total cost at your profit maximizing quantity of Q star. All right, we kind of went across it there. We have Q star coming up to average total cost, which is this lovely yellow line here. And so what we can see then quite clearly in this picture is that the price, the P star and the Q star, the P star is quite a significantly higher amount than average total cost. So we are making a profit. And then we can, let's see here, let's have a new color. We can then shade in our profit. So it's going to be the area from the P down to the average total cost for all the units Q star that I'm selling. Whoops, that's supposed to be at P star. And so it's this whole shaded rectangle. So we should see then a repeating of what we've done before in perfect competition. What's a little different is our demand curve is now downward sloping. Our demand curve does not equal our marginal revenue, but at the heart, what we're doing here can be broken down into these little steps. And I recommend you do break it down into these little steps where you find marginal revenue equal marginal cost, Q star. Use that Q star to find the price you should charge. You got to look at the demand curve, wherever it is, downward sloping, horizontal, don't care. Find that P star. And then you take that P star at the Q star and you compare that to the average total cost. And so the final step would be if, come on pen, if, there we go, price greater than average total cost, I should say the P star is greater than that, implies profit. And that is what we would normally expect with the monopolist. They're not going to stay in business for long if they're not making a profit unless we get into something more complicated like the government giving them a subsidy. And so the other thing that's significant about the profit for a monopolist is since entry is blocked, nobody's going to come in and affect the market supply curve. Nobody's going to drive the price down. They could probably sit there for a very long time and make a profit.